Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. I'm Dr. Dejana, and I'm here with Dr. Leah. Hello, Leah.
Hello, Dr. Dejana. I'm so happy to be here again. I love these conversations, and we have a really interesting guest today who, at one time, was doing curriculum development for Humboldt County, but has been all over the world doing curriculum development in augmented reality, and I think that we will have a very rich conversation about the future of education. Why don't you first introduce Mark, and then I will introduce Michael.
Absolutely. So, if you're a regular viewer, I want to introduce you yet again to Mark Riddle. We're so happy he joins us, continues to join us on our panel. Mark has degrees in music, theology, and sociology. He works at West Coast University and lives in Los Angeles, California. Say hello, Mark. Welcome.
Great to be back again.
And that's Dr. Mark Riddle. And I believe we have Dr. Michael Carter with us. So Michael, I gave a little bit of an introduction as to I knew we met at the EdTech Conference a week or so ago, a virtual conference, and there were so many fascinating presentations that day. And we had a conversation in a breakout room about curriculum development and what to expect next. What are you, I guess, most concerned about and most optimistic about with the future of curriculum?
Well, I'm most concerned about returning to normal. Our school system for the last 100 years has been designing for the factory assembly line and looked like a factory assembly line. So the curriculum was designed to have someone talk to a group of disparate students as if they were average and teach them the important things that they needed to make Ford Motor cars. And I'm not exaggerating. That is exactly what the classroom of 18 months ago were like, all over, everywhere. And American test scores have not moved up above incompetence, below basic competence in reading and mathematics for 30 years. And now people are saying, oh, thank God we don't have to wear masks anymore or worry about a plague, so we can go back to the classroom and teach the kids that way.
Boy, are you talking to the right crowd about that, Michael, because that is our cry and why we've been doing this stream for the last year. Because if we go back to business as usual in the classroom, we've missed such an opportunity. This pandemic created a reality where all the parents who have been just kind of taking the kids and dropping them off at school and asking them if they've done their homework suddenly became educators. And the need to be engaged is there. And I think we have parents now saying, well, wait a minute, this is not a great system. I just spent a year watching my kids do the work that they're supposed to be doing. So how do we make that change inviting, Michael? How do we get buy-in from educators? And I don't think buy-in from students is at all the problem. If we make it more interesting, they're going to enjoy that.
Well, when I was doing a lot of studying kids, the way they learned on the internet about 15 years ago with John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation money, I learned one really important thing, that learning is social in that generation and in this generation. And I also learned a lot about communities of practice, which instead of being the guild model where you were an apprentice and then, it was flat and everybody learned from everybody. And one of the people that influenced me in Silicon Valley was Bill Campbell, who somebody wrote a book about called The $1 Trillion Coach, because he coached Steve Jobs and he coached all sorts of founders. So I'm kind of into like tiered coaching. I think kids should just be given problems. And then somebody should coach the parents how to coach the kids. And somebody should coach the coaches of the parents how to do that. And it should be this kind of big community of people that are helping each other teach kids how to address problems and solve them. And I actually trained back in the 60s and 70s as a early modern European historian. So I was there for the scientific revolution, I mean, vicariously. And that's what it's all about, even if you call it design thinking. It's about, hey, dude, look at the problem, look at the phenomenon. What do you see? What do you think's going on? Tell me about it. If you start every learning activity with that, then you're going to make scientists, you're going to make makers, you're going to have kids who are going to look at the problems, I mean, the big problems of today, like climate, and problems for their life that I can't even imagine, and they'll have the right attitude.
So Mark and Dejana are going to think that you're a plant because you are talking our language. This is so exciting to me to hear what you're saying, because we do a lot of professional development. We do a lot of work in schools with teachers, and that is our plea to them. It's like, don't give kids answers anymore. Give them a challenge and maybe some random materials to work with, and then let them invent, prototype, come up with ideas. Mark, go ahead.
I was just feeling like it was getting awfully crowded on my soapbox. So there we go. But I was remembering, because I keep saying this, but I was remembering to one of the early of our episodes with the cardboard artists, right? And the way they just, they had a problem. They wanted to make some stuff that looked like they're, like superheroes or cartoon characters, or, and whatever it was. And the parents found a way to support that by, like coming in and saying, yeah, it looks like that fell over. What are you going to do to, strengthen it? And, oh yeah, do you need a ride to the store for more hot glue? I mean, like get out of the way, let the kids do the thing. And, and if there's, follow through or wrap up later, then yeah, be a part of that. But a lot of our education puts more hindrance in the way of students than problems. It's just, like, do this worksheet. Good luck.
Right, those boys, that's the Lee brothers, and they build life-size models of their superheroes. So the first one fell over, and they then realized, we have to build a skeleton inside it. And they learned physics in order to better their project. So it once you have a child's interest in something, and if they're interested in researching a problem and trying to fix a problem, then they will engage and find the information that they need. Sorry, Dejana, I can take over.
No, I was going to say, absolutely. I love that we mentioned them. They're the cardboard superheroes. And one of the things that I think, because of the pandemic, that we're going to have some really cool disruptive educators out there that have taken risks and have stepped back and let their students do this critical thinking and this problem solving, because all of us had to experience this as educators during the pandemic. We were like, okay, we're going to be doing school virtual. Good luck. So we all got to practice that as adults, and we recognize the learning benefits that we went through. And I think hopefully we'll be able to better create scenarios for our students to be in situations where, like, that seems to be like a situation right there. What are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And let's work together collaboratively to see if we can come up with some creative ideas to address the problem. So that's one of the things that I think is a benefit from us having to deal with this really challenging year, in education, it opens up space for us to try some really cool disruptive, meaning different, like we're not going to we're not going to be all working in the factory anymore. We're going to be, trying to solve things like food insecurity and global pandemics, and like we're doing some other things here that we're going to be working on. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to mention. I think Dr. Carter hit on that. Is we gotta make problem solvers. We can't just preach to them. This is, I'm a science teacher. Let's open up to page 17 and I'm going to tell you everything I know about such and such. Well, what I know isn't going to help solve problems or issues or observations later. We want you to practice those skills. So what you observe, you can then come up with some creative ideas and creative problem solving. So I'm actually kind of hopeful and optimistic that the pandemic has caused some positive disruption in how we do things. And we're not going to go back to the same old. We're actually going to emerge even better.
So Michael, and this will be one of those, I've been to so many writers' conferences and whatnot, and people have been inevitably asked the author, so how did what was the germ of that idea or whatever? And, they throw their hands up. I was eating a banana. But you've created a bunch of curriculum over the years that's problem based. How do you go about figuring out what the problem is that's going to lead to something that will be engaging? Like do you have some like rules of thumb for which ones to leave on the drawing room table and which ones go on the whiteboard for further development?
Well, I am not so naive that I don't think that whether or not the states, for political reasons or financial reasons, didn't adopt standards for a reason. But I'm aware that teachers are held to standards and to teaching to standards. Now, NGSS is Common Core State Standards is widely adopted in the United States because my friend was giving away $5.1 billion as bribes to states to adopt the Common Core. NGSS, not so much, 19 states, District of Columbia. But I know that when it hits, it's there and it's not unavoidable, okay? I think, particularly NGSS, which I could probably recite from memory, having looked at them hundreds of times, are incomprehensible. I think Common Core State Standards are like, what? But that's not my job. I'm not a public school teacher in the United States, so I don't have to worry about that. But that's ultimately where people are going to be measured by. What I think, and John, I hear you. Although if you call me Dr. Carter again, I'm going to go out look for a job doing brain surgery. So call me Michael. I think the biggest obstacle right now to getting it right is that people aren't realizing that teaching that way, the scientific method, design thinking, NGSS, I don't care what you call it, making, is actually a liberating experience for teachers. And the trick is to make them realize that they can teach to these standards without being a drone on a screen of a gallery, because that's what's killing everybody. It kills the teacher, it kills the students. Just start the day and say, hey guys, here's a problem, here's a phenomenon. Go away and mess with it for a while, and let's come back and talk about it. And if you got a question, ping me and I'll talk to you about it.
Well, it encourages research. It encourages curiosity. I mean, there are just so many things in that. And and it helps develop that problem-solving muscle. Because,
but I mean, as a teacher, but teaching is like being a parent. I mean, the fact is, the first time I went to Saudi Arabia, for reasons I can't remember, I understood two things that I had never understood before growing up in LA. That women were allowed to be teachers because it was an extension of motherhood. And they were allowed to be nurses because it was an extension of motherhood, parenting. This is a very, very old culture. But, so now I realize that in some sense, teaching is being an extension of parent in a way that previous to the plague, right?
mm-hmm.
But I'm a dad, I raised some kids, grandkids. I would love to be the guy that just helped them out rather than the guy that told them what was. So I think most teachers in America that have been scrambling to learn how to be online teachers, which is something I've been doing since 1997, would be really pleased to hear it's like, hey, no, just help. Just be a good mom, be a good dad. Just help. And that's what I call would design as professional development for the 2021 and 2022.
Short and sweet lesson. The the challenge, I think, at this point is the administration is in a hurry to get everything back to the way it was. And it's the financial model, I think, that's in the way. We pay for kids in seats. Yeah. And so until we need to come up with a new system that honors completed work. So a student doesn't come to class but finishes all of the projects. I mean, Nolan, before we were all together, Michael was telling me that he knew Nolan Bushnell from back in the late 70s, early 80s. And Nolan tells a story of his youngest son, who was a straight A student, rarely cracked a book, but just whatever he heard, he retained and could get it back to them. And but found the homework to be really just busy work and didn't do. So he had an A in biology, but he hadn't handed in some of the homework, and the teacher gave him a D on his final report card. And he went in, and Nolan went with him to try and lobby on his behalf, and do you want to do an oral test to make sure that he was actually answering those questions from his knowledge rather than reading from a book, and the teacher said no. He clearly knows the material. He's demonstrated his knowledge, and yes, he on in terms of retention deserves an A, but he didn't hand in the homework, so he's getting a D. And it's just like we're so rigid in our way of grading and our way of measuring intelligence. And to your point earlier, Michael, there hasn't been any change really in the way we educate kids since we started educating kids in the public school system. It's maybe we now have gone to tables instead of rows of, but really that's kind of back to the original, going to tables rather than desks in rows. But this is a real opportunity to make significant changes and let in my opinion anyway, automation could take care of all the mundane work that a teacher has to do, from taking attendance to even grading small papers that the kids, checking for grammar and checking their math homework, all those things. That sort of thing can be automated. And then the teacher can become the facilitator, the helper, the person who you go to when you need help with questions. How am I going to find this out? And the teacher can engage in effective questioning. And I also think in that system, we would have a better chance of seeing a troubled child in the early days when we could still do something for that child, as opposed to letting them move through the system and go from grade to grade without learning. And then we find out when they're a teenager that they're there are mental illness issues, and we're locking down the school because somebody's coming up with a gun.
Yeah, well, ever since Google, and I remember going to Google at the very beginning where they talked about how many searches there were, and they had a 3D model visualization of searches, and most of them in the evening were from China who were searching medical stuff in the U.S. That was, I don't know, 20 years ago. Data, I know a guy who works for readworks.org in Brooklyn who probably has 1 trillion transactional data on how kids learn to read. So it's all there, whether we bother to do anything with it or not. So yes, the teacher definitely doesn't need to be looking at the kid and watching where her eyes are going on the text to know what's going on in her as a learner of reading. Bots do that, data does that.
Right.
And what people are not doing is recognizing that that's a resource for a teacher, not disintermediating the teacher.
Yeah, we're not, the fear of the teacher being replaced. I mean, first of all, it's kind of crazy to think you might put a community of kids together without adult supervision, and those would be the teachers. What the teachers are there to do is where I think we really could make some adjustments right now that as you said earlier, Michael, would make the teachers happier. If they really did not have to have a lesson plan for each child in the room, but could allow each child in the room to pursue their own interests to a certain degree, I think the teacher would be happy with that situation, as long as they didn't have to be the ones to do all the research and do all the grading and have a different system for each child. But so much of that can be automated.
If you allow an old man a metaphor,
Sure.
the data that we currently have on every student in the world is something that for the teacher should not be a stick that they hit the kid with. It's a scalpel. It really is a finely tuned instrument that allows them to go into the kid and say, okay, based on what you've been doing for the last 10 minutes, hour, day, month, year, it's what my public librarian used to do to me when I was reading science fiction. I think it might be a great idea for you to do this. Or when the data tells the kid, hey, dude, this is where you can go. Don't go here. You're not ready. But this is where you can go. And by the way, this is where you've been. I love to have Disney maps of where a kid have been. Then the teacher's there to say, can I help you choose between those places? That's it. It's just they have access. Our teachers now should have access to knowing exactly where every child is in their learning. It's like the Diamond Age, Neil Stephenson, and that was 20 years ago.
I just read that recently, by the way, and brilliant. And also the idea that science fiction has been showing us for several decades what kinds of opportunities exist for independent learning. The technology is there, the ideas are there, we just have not caught up with it yet.
Yeah. So can I say something that's kind of like an advertisement?
Sure.
I just had a 2-hour conversation with a woman whom I think is brilliant and dedicated, who is creating a network of educators, worldwide network. And she's having some kind of event on Twitter in about 3 weeks to try to get educators to talk to each other. And I'm just doing this because I met her at the same thing. She's a woman that did the EdTech meetup space in Gather. She designed that. So she's really thoughtful about designing spaces for people to get together. So she's responsible for us knowing each other. So if anyone out there would send me a ping at carter@me.com, I will forward her invitation to this event for educators to test out how it would work. I think it's a really great thing. And I don't know, it would be wonderful if we all actually had a place we could go to hang out and talk about this stuff that wasn't time specific, like this.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
It'd be like, oh, I got a minute. I'm going to go talk to somebody about this thing that I encountered, and I don't know what to do about it.
I would love to. Yeah, I would love to know about it, and would absolutely join in. I'm sure Dr. Figueroa would too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So my fastest address is carter@me.com, and anybody who sends me something, I will promise to forward her invitation.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think you tapped on something that I think is really important as well, is creating spaces for educators to come together and have these types of conversations. And given our shift to creating digital spaces, online spaces like this, before we'd have to go to conferences and we'd fly places and we try and meet up in our schedule. But now I think we've definitely found the power of meeting virtually and creating these really cool spaces where conversations like these can happen to help encourage one another, find out new ideas, share these things on a platform where collectively we can come together and make change. So another, indication of how technology is really pushing us forward in creating spaces for communication. Before we end here, though, I know Leah mentioned your involvement in the EdTech community. I wanted to ask you what your perspective is on the state of educational technology, where it's been, where it is today, and where it's going.
Well, the joke in the 80s was don't get impatient, because it took 20 years for the overhead projector to come out of the bowling alley and get into the classroom. But now I think it's very accelerated. And the most positive thing, believe it or not, that I think about ed tech these days is that the venture capitalists, the people who have investments from foundations and from rich individuals, as I say, people who made all their money they're ever going to need at Google, are very focused on solutions that will address the inequality in education and will address them in an innovative way, and address them in a way that involves teachers rather than disintermediating them. Those people, and they're friends of mine that I've worked with over decades, they're very serious about this, and they're going to make this happen. And so I just, because I live in this pimple in California that is called Silicon Valley, I am more optimistic about the future of technology and education than I have been since the early 1980s, where people were like it was a big deal to put an Apple II in a school.
Cool. I love it. If we can end the show with optimism, right?
Yes.
Well, take a look at our time. What do you say, Dr. Leah Haynes? What do we do?
The half hour goes pretty fast, doesn't it? So I think we're saying goodbye and thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Michael. We really appreciate everything that you brought to this conversation. Mark, always a pleasure. And for our viewers, thank you. We hope to see you next time. That's a wrap for this show. Please join us next time, next Wednesday, same time, same place, for another episode of Teachers for Teachers. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.